Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. Tonight we're going to be talking about a brand new Paul McCartney and Wings album. Well, sorta, kinda. That and, the sound of one hand clapping. One Hand Clapping by Paul McCartney and Wings is a live album that was recorded in August of 1974 by Paul McCartney and his brand new version of Wings. Of course, the version that existed prior to this lineup was a very bare version of Wings, consisting only of Paul McCartney, Linda McCartney, and Denny Laine, and they were, of course, responsible for recording the masterpiece Band on the Run. Now, you got to go back to August of 1974. What was happening at this time in England when Paul decided to bring his entire band into EMI Studios to record them live? Now, Band on the Run, the very week that McCartney and Wings recorded these tracks that we're going to talk about tonight, was in its 7th week at being number 1 at the time. So Paul knew there was a timing issue here. He had new material. He was writing a lot of material off to the side that would wind up on their very next album. Of course, I'm talking about the wonderful album Venus and Mars. Now, he not only was writing new material for a new album and wanted a full band for not only recording purposes but for touring purposes, and of course he had brought in Jimmy McCulloch and Jeff Britton. You know, Jeff Britton is the mystery drummer for Wings, isn't he? He was there and gone before you even knew he was in the band. Now, McCartney knew they were going to be recording another album. As a matter of fact, he would begin to record Venus and Mars in November of this same year, a mere 2.5 months after these recordings were made. Now, these recordings were going to originally be televised, with talk of even producing a live album for Wings. And we're going to be talking about that because, of course, Wings would eventually produce a live album, Wings Over America, a triple album, and one of the best live albums in rock and roll, in my opinion. So you may be asking yourself, do we really need another live Wings album? And I say absolutely, and this is the reason why I say so. You see, Wings Over America is an excellent example of arena rock. But this album, One Hand Clapping, was recorded again just as live as anything you've heard off of Wings Over America, but in an intimate studio. I mean, there was Paul McCartney and Wings. Of course, Jeff Emerick was there, Howie Casey and his horn players off to the side, and of course, Mucky Mucks coming in and out over a 4-day period. And when I say that, I should say 3-day period as a band. The 4th day is just Paul McCartney by himself doing a few cuts that he wanted to do on his own. So with One Hand Clapping, not only do you have a Wings that you might see in a nightclub, that intimate of recordings. I love these recordings, I always have, and they sound wonderful now being remixed, and I feel that it has been an album that has been long overdue to be released. You see, these recordings were made at a time that Paul McCartney couldn't have been busier. In 73, he had Band on the Run, and of course, in 75, he would have Venus and Mars. Now, with this album and the addition of, Wings' mystery drummer, Jeff Britton, we have an album that sandwiches perfectly between Band on the Run and Venus and Mars. But not only that, there are songs on this album by McCartney that he never intended for Wings or for himself necessarily as a solo artist. And I love these cuts, these more intimate Paul McCartney cuts. And therefore, this album almost becomes a lesson in songwriting. I mean, when you consider the stylings, Paul McCartney's musical stylings that are included into this album, it only proves one point and one point only. This man, along with John Lennon, of course, was one of the two greatest songwriters in the 20th century. And for that reason alone, one hand clapping becomes an essential collection piece. Now, of course, I mentioned that there would be only 3 cuts that Jeff Britton was on. Of course, he got into a tussle, I think mainly with Jimmy. The two of them never got along, and he decided to leave the band, and he was replaced by Joe English. And it's Joe English, for the most part, you hear on Venus and Mars. With this album, Jeff Britton is very well represented, and I still say this man had a snap and a syncopation to his drumming that no other Wings drummer had, with the exception of maybe a bit of Joe English's style. Now, one thing I did want to mention is the artwork on the album, and when I see it here right before me, it looks a lot better than it has in videos on the album. The artwork doesn't translate very well to photos of it and everything, but still, I would say this is a bit bare. I'm not really impressed with it any more than anybody else with. It's not that the artwork is bad, it's just bland. It doesn't pop out in any way. Now, as far as this album being a double album, I think that sits well, especially in today's market. We have the triple live album by Paul and a handful of others that I don't really care one iota for. But as a double album, these more intimate recordings I think are better well served as just 4 sides, not 6 or 8 or anything like that. All right, folks, that's the video for today. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up. I always say that, but it does trigger the YouTube algorithm into putting the video into more people's home feeds. And if you haven't subscribed to this thing we call the Tribe, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is hit that subscribe to the Tribe button, tap that top bell icon, and you'll be notified of all my future videos. If you don't tap that thing, it's a crapshoot, right? All right, I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line, and I always have to say this, the bottom line as I see it. The real bottom line is always in the comments. That's where you folks come alive, and that's where we, you and I, are the Tribe.